From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome, friends. Pull your chair a little closer to the fire. The night outside feels longer than usual, the kind of night when shadows stretch across the windows and the sound of rain turns the world quiet. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about a knock at the door. A knock that came to hundreds of homes across the United Kingdom. And to this day, no one can say for certain who is standing on the other side. Imagine it's a weeknight. Dinner dishes still in the sink, the hum of the television in the background. Then comes that knock. When you open the door, there's a woman standing there, clipboard in hand, polite but firm.
Good evening. I'm with Social Services. There's been a report.
Behind her, a man stands near the gate, half in shadow. You ask for identification. And in that pause, that tiny flicker of hesitation, something in you changes. Before you can say another word, they turn and walk away. No car, no explanation, just gone. And suddenly, the rain sounds different. The house feels colder. And you can't shake the feeling that something terribly wrong just brushed past your front door. Tonight, on From the Void, we'll unravel one of the strangest and most unsettling stories to come out of the 1990s. Reports of strangers impersonating social workers. Families terrified, entire communities on edge. A story the press would come to call the Phantom Social Worker Scare. So stoke the fire, pour yourself a drink, and let's begin. The year is 1990. Britain is still shaking off the chaos of the previous decade. Miners' strikes, the Thatcher years, and a rising anxiety about child abuse scandals that dominated headlines. In communities across England and Scotland, rumors began to spread. Strangers, polite, professional, unnervingly calm, are showing up at people's homes, claiming to be social workers. They say they've received reports of neglect. They need to see the children. Sometimes they ask to take photographs. Sometimes they request to examine them for bruises. And then, they vanish. These encounters weren't isolated. By summer, police across more than 20 counties had received reports. The national press called it the Phantom Social Worker Scare. Law enforcement called it Operation Childcare, a coordinated investigation meant to uncover who these visitors were, what they wanted, and whether they posed a real danger. But what they found only deepened the mystery. Despite the scale of the reports, no arrests were ever made, no evidence of an organized network, no clear motive. Yet parents remained terrified. It began quietly, as these things often do. The first cases appeared that spring in northern England and southern Scotland. Families described the same pattern. A woman in professional clothing, well-spoken, sometimes accompanied by a man. She introduced herself as a social worker, following up on a welfare report. She seemed to know just enough personal details to sound convincing. And then she'd ask to see the children.
Good evening. I'm with Social Services.
And several early reports included those logged by South Yorkshire police. The imposters were said to have asked to take photographs of the children, claiming it was part of an inspection. In some cases, they even requested to examine the children for bruises or injuries. These weren't just strangers knocking at the door. They were imitating the procedures and authority of actual child protection workers. And that made the encounters even more convincing. and far more disturbing. Within weeks, similar reports surfaced in Leeds, Manchester, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. Descriptions matched, same clothing, similar vehicles waiting at the curb. Each encounter ended the same way. They'd vanish before police could arrive. By early summer, dozens of forces were logging reports with eerily consistent details. The media caught on fast. Headlines warned of bogus child snatchers and phantom care workers. Law enforcement launched a nationwide operation, Operation Childcare. But as the investigation unfolded, nothing added up. No fingerprints, no plates, no evidence. It was as if the visitors had appeared out of thin air and vanished just as quickly. One of the earliest confirmed reports came from a mother in Sheffield, South Yorkshire. Late April 1990. A woman arrived at her door, smartly dressed, clipboard in hand, polite and professional. She said she was a social worker following up on a report about the welfare of the children. The visitor seemed to know the family's names and details, but her ID badge looked homemade. When the mother insisted on verifying the visit, the woman abruptly ended the conversation, walked to a waiting car, and left before anyone could note its number. Moments later, the mother called social services. They had no record of any visit and no employee by that name. Her statement was logged by South Yorkshire Police, one of the first in a series of nearly identical reports across Britain. No evidence recovered, no suspects identified. But this and dozens of similar accounts triggered Operation Childcare. By the summer of 1990, reports were flooding police stations nationwide. South Yorkshire Police led a joint task force involving 23 forces across England and Scotland. Its goal: to collect reports, cross-reference details, and find whoever was impersonating social workers. But with inconsistent statements and no centralized database, officers were soon overwhelmed. At its height, more than 250 reports were filed. Yet months of interviews and sketches yielded no concrete evidence, no arrests, and no sign of an organized network. Still, the absence of evidence didn't quiet the storm. The press had seized the story. And in the pre-internet age, newspapers shaped national fear. In June and July of 1990, outlets like The Guardian, The Daily Mail, and The Scotsman ran features warning of child snatchers, masquerading as social workers. Headlines read, "Bogus social workers hunt," "Nationwide probe into child snatcher scare," and "Have you seen her?" Some papers even printed composite sketches of supposed suspects. Artist impressions built on vague witness memories. Attempts to visualize what no one could prove existed. Real social workers soon faced harassment, refused entry to homes, and in some regions began traveling in pairs for safety. By 1991, as reports tapered off, the Home Office quietly ended Operation Childcare. No conspiracy found, no perpetrators named. To some, it had been a media-fueled moral panic. To others, an unsolved mystery that officialdom simply couldn't explain away. So let's talk theories and explanations. Operation Childcare didn't fail because of apathy. It failed under its own weight. Before digital databases or email, information moved by fax and phone. Reports arrived incomplete, delayed, and duplicated across 20-plus jurisdictions. Investigators were drowning in noise, and by the time they reached witnesses, days or weeks had passed. In the end, it wasn't poor police work, it was an impossible task. So, let's look at some theories. Theory number one is the criminal hypothesis. The simplest theory says that these were opportunists. burglars or abductors posing as social workers. On paper, it fits. The imposters showed up at homes unannounced, spoke with authority, and asked to see or even photograph the children. That behavior could make sense if the goal was abduction. Taking photos might have been a way to identify or target specific victims, testing which families were most vulnerable. But here's the problem. No one was ever abducted. Not a single child disappeared. And nothing else was stolen either. Not money, not property. If this was an organized attempt to kidnap or exploit children, it failed every time, or never really existed at all. Hundreds of reports, hundreds of faces described, yet not one reliable composite sketch, not one traceable vehicle, not one arrest. So if the motive was criminal, it was the most ineffective crime spree in modern history, which leaves a deeper question. Were these would-be abductors who never followed through, or something stranger entirely? Theory number 2, the institutional mirror. Some suggested the imposters might have been real, volunteers or uncredentialed staff working inside an overstretched system. The behavior seemed authentic, methodical, procedural, even bureaucratic, asking to photograph children or check for bruises. That accuracy led investigators to wonder if the visitors had training or insider knowledge. But after the 1987 Cleveland, England scandal, where over 120 children were wrongly diagnosed as abuse victims, the UK moved towards stricter oversight, not looser. Every home visit required documentation and supervision. There's no record of freelance or rogue agents making house calls. So the institutional mirror theory explains the imitation, but not the origin. And that's the problem each theory runs into. They make sense on paper, but only in the middle of the story. The criminal theory explains the fear, the institutional theory explains the imitation, but neither explains the spark. What started it? Who those first visitors were, or why they were never identified? Which brings us to the third and most popular theory, the one sociologists still cite today. The idea that none of it began with criminals or insiders at all, but with us. Theory 3, the moral panic. The moral panic theory argues that a few misunderstandings or local rumors ignited a nationwide hysteria. Once the press got a hold of the story, fear spread faster than fact. Parents warned neighbors, schools issued alerts, real social workers doubled up on visits for safety. Sociologists call it social contagion, fear transmitted by repetition and imagination. But here's the thing. The earliest reports, March and April 1990, came before any headlines. Those first families described the same scene. The clipboard, the professional tone, the request to see and even photograph the children. So while moral panic explains how the fear spread, it doesn't explain how it began. Something, or someone, started it. Operation Childcare closed in 1991 with no arrests and no closure. Theories abound, but none are fully satisfying. Criminals? Their methods made no sense. No gain, no evidence. Insiders? No records, no precedent for unsupervised visits. Moral panic? Explains the wildfire, not the spark. Hundreds of encounters, hundreds of witnesses, yet no usable fingerprints, no clear vehicle, and no consistent face. Either Britain collectively hallucinated the same imposter, or someone, somewhere, pulled off a vanishing act that defied every investigative tool of its time. What makes the case haunting isn't just the lack of proof, it's the precision of the absence. Fear filled the space where facts should have been. We started tonight with a knock at the door, and in a way, we end there too. Because this story was never just about who was outside. It was about what we fear might be. The phantom social workers were never caught. No fingerprints, no photographs, just stories. And the echo of authority twisted into something unrecognizable. Maybe it was hysteria. Maybe imitation. Maybe something else entirely. But what made it powerful wasn't proof. It was possibility. Because when someone knocks and claims to be there to help, most of us open the door. Or at least, we want to believe we can. That's why this story endures. It's a mirror of our instinct to trust, our fear of deception, and the uneasy truth that even when the danger isn't real, the dread still is. Thanks for listening to From the Void. I've been your host, John Williamson, and thanks for joining me by the fire tonight.